I promote abstinence. Further, the idea that, look, this is very similar to drug addiction or alcoholism, And so when I hear people talk about everything in moderation, or they say, or there's people out there that deny food addiction is real, that sugar addiction is real. They try to say that, well, we're just being lazy, we lack discipline.
Hey guys, thank you so much for supporting us and watching our videos. If you'd like to support us some more and get some of our merchandise like this awesome apron, be sure to check out our website at thecarnivorerevolution.com. Hey everybody, welcome to the Carnivore Revolution. Today my special guest is Mary Roberts. You know her as Keto Mary. So she's not carnivore, has experimented with carnivore, but we're going to talk about low carb today, not just carnivore. We're going to talk about a clean ketogenic diet, how it can help you, how it can make you feel better. And Mary just has a great story of recovery from binge eating and all the things. So we're going to talk about all that. Mary, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with your story. Like, how did you end up being Keto Mary? Because I think it's pretty cool. Almost everybody knows who you are. I mean, it's just you have a presence because of the things you talk about and what you stand for. And so I think it's really important that people hear the stories of healing, and not just physically, but emotionally and mentally too.
Yeah. So the short version is, since I was a preteen to age 42, I really battled eating disorders, from compulsive eating, bulimia, binge eating. I was hospitalized in high school for bulimia. I've been in and out of outpatient treatment programs, and I tried 12-step programs and different therapists and things like that over the years. I was constantly on a diet. My first attempt at losing weight, my very first diet was when I was 14. And it just was it became like this lifelong thing. So of course I tried anything and everything. I'm 52 years old, so it goes way back. I've done Richard Simmons' Deal a Meal. I did Weight Watchers a million times. Jenny Craig, Nutrisystem, Dexatrim, Phentermine, Susan Powter, Stop the Insanity. I've done everything.
Same here.
What about the commercial for it?
What about the cabbage soup diet?
That was one thing I never did.
Oh,
I
really?
never did the grapefruit thing.
Oh my goodness, how funny.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Did either of those, but if there was an infomercial for it, or it was trendy and people were doing it, I was on it.
Mm-hmm.
So I got familiar with low carb. My first exposure to low carb was through a friend of mine who said she was doing Atkins. And at the time, I don't know if they still do this, but at the time, if you went to their website, you would get this little kit of information about how Atkins works, and they'd send you their free bars and stuff like that. So my first exposure to that was in 2010. And I knew that I had an issue with carbs, but I had this food addiction, and I was a binge eater and compulsive eater. And so anything else I did, it was temporary. I couldn't, your willpower only goes so far. And so when I was 42, so about 10 years ago, a friend of mine introduced me to keto, and I tried it. And it was the first time in my life that I didn't, I was doing a diet, but I didn't feel like I was on a diet. I wasn't suffering from hunger. I wasn't angry. I wasn't starving. It was just such a huge difference, and it calmed my brain down. And anything I'd ever done before never did that. I was always still hungry and craving, because it was Weight Watchers, you're eating things 100-calorie packs, and, whatever you can, eating the things that have low points so you could eat lots versus, steak and eggs would have wiped out my points, for the day or whatever. So I would, always be trying to eat as much of low point things as I could. So of course I was always hungry. And I was a calorie counter, notoriously, underate, which of course can't stick to it. And the things that I was eating were things that kept me craving and all of that. So when keto came along, and it literally calmed my brain down, and I didn't feel hungry and I was suffering and on a diet, I was able to stick to it. And then I was able to start actually I wanted to change my relationship with food. I didn't want to continue the pattern of constantly being on a diet, constantly trying to lose weight. And in the past, of all the things that I'd done, I never had lost anything beyond 40 pounds. That was my my max. I would hit 40 pounds, and then either at that point my willpower went away, or I got cocky and started thinking, oh, I can, eat some other things now, right? And it would just always fall apart, and I would gain it
Mhm.
back and then some. But this was different, and so it paved. I always say that um, keto saved my life in terms of reversing all my health problems that I had, but it didn't directly fix my eating disorder, but it paved the way for me to get into recovery and actually be able to apply things, and change my behavior and my mindset, because I wasn't, when you're suffering from hunger and cravings and feeling like you're on a diet, you can't concentrate on things of recovery. Like it just doesn't, it just never worked for me. So keto was the vehicle that got me into recovery from my food addiction and eating disorders.
And you hear people always talking about everything in moderation, like all of the current,
Yeah.
modern dietitians and all of that. They always want to say everything in moderation. But as you and I both know, if you are a carb addict or a food addict, a binge eater, you cannot eat things in moderation. I've never had one Oreo. I've never had one cupcake. I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
So it's like being an alcoholic or a drug addict, and
Mhm.
you would never say to an alcoholic, "Oh, come on, just have one drink," right?
Yeah.
People are always pressuring us, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that my message is not popular because I promote abstinence,
Yeah.
because I further the idea that, look, this is very similar to drug addiction or alcoholism, and so when I hear people talk about everything in moderation, or they say, or there's people out there that deny food addiction is real, that sugar addiction is real. They try to say that, well, we're just being lazy, we lack discipline, and we say that about ourselves too when we're not, when we're in the midst of all of it. And so it's really insulting when as if all of these years, the thought to have everything in moderation never occurred to me, right? Like I've never tried that. And so it really is it's an insulting thing to say. And I think it's also very revealing. People that say that either have their own addiction that they're unwilling to recognize and give up, or they don't understand addiction at all, food addiction in particular, because they're moderators. I think at this point, though, like what I'm recognizing and realizing these last few years, I mean, I'm sure you've heard the statistic that 88%, or maybe even the newest statistic of 93% of the population is metabolically unhealthy. I think that's very telling. So I think being disordered with food is actually more common than not. There are moderators that exist, but I don't. I think that they're kind of rare.
Yeah, and you mentioned Weight Watchers before, and so I just wanted to touch on that for a minute because even though I was bulimic and a binge eater and a carb addict and a sugar addict like you, when I did Weight Watchers, what I realized was that I was under eating all the time. Like
Mm,
it's really weird that you can be a binge eater, but then also like be a chronic under eater, and people have a hard
mhm.
time like understanding that and what happens to your body when you're doing that. You're
Right.
inflamed, your body is confused. When you are restricting, your body is in extreme crisis mode because it can't understand what's going on. It doesn't understand why you're not feeding it. And then when you do feed it, it holds on to everything. And when I did Weight Watchers, it just goes to show, and you know this because of the whole point system. Weight Watchers is not about everything in moderation, and people think that it is, but you can't really eat everything in moderation because some of the things are so high in their point system. Like you said, it knocks out all of your points. So not many people eat a ribeye on Weight Watchers because it uses all of your
I
points
never
for the
did.
day. Right, exactly. I didn't either. I did lean meat, so like just chicken and turkey breast, and that was it.
Yep.
And then
Rice.
and lots of vegetables. Like that was pretty much what I was eating. And after months of not losing weight doing this, I was so frustrated. I counted up my calories too, just to see. I was eating like 900 or 1,000 calories a day on Weight
Yeah.
Watchers. And that's why they want you to eat more of those free foods because those have calories, but you have to eat so many of them, you end up gorging anyway. It's just the weirdest
Right.
system. And that's why people can't stick with it. That's the same reason people can't stick with any kind of diet is because they look at it like it's a diet and they make it through however long they want to make it through to get to whatever goal they want. And then they go back to eating all the things they used
Mhm.
to eat, and they will say, "Oh, that didn't work for me. As soon as I went back to eating normally, I gained all my weight back." Normally is how you got to where you were, whether it was sick or overweight or whatever, that's how you got there. So
Yeah.
you have to make it a lifestyle change, right? You can't just do it as a diet. You have to become a low carber for life, right?
Right. Right. I think, well, so for me, and the people I work with, I put it in terms of like, we're going to cut out drug foods.
Mhm.
Okay. So even when you get to goal weight, I always say goal weight is actually a danger zone for a lot of people for just the reason that you were just saying, you get there, you think you've arrived,
Mhm.
now it's over, and we're going to like go back to like adding things in. The problem is when you're an addict and you add things back in, you're not adding them in moderation. There's two types of people. The ones that when they take the first bite, it's immediately a cliff dive, downward spiral. And then there's the slow fade type where they do eat something, they're able to control it in the morning or in the moment, but then a week later it's like, oh, it's my, I'm going to do this again. And then
Mhm.
it gets like closer and closer and closer together before you know it, every day you're back on, the old habit. So it's like a slower, spiral. But yeah, I think that's that happens a lot with people.
Yeah. And for me, being a carnivore, I have allowed a couple of things to slide in here and there.
Mhm.
Like artichokes are my thing right now. And because I've given myself the okay to eat an artichoke with butter on occasion, then I switched to like marinated artichokes and eating like a whole jar in one sitting. Like you can still do that with foods that people consider healthy.
Yeah.
One time I ate like a giant bag of kale from Sam's sauteed in like
Mhm.
coconut oil with salt. And I remember talking to a friend about just how horrible I felt, and she said, "I've never heard anybody feel guilty about eating too much kale." And that really is spoken like a true non-drug addict, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
she does not have a problem with food, she does not understand what it's like to eat
Right.
that much of one thing, and even if it's a healthy thing, I can't be a moderator.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it really is comes down to like identifying those drug foods, and like your drug foods may not be my drug foods and vice versa. So it's food sobriety and the journey of recovery is a personal thing. Everyone has to figure out like what their food boundaries are. And, like, so I know for sure processed foods, I don't eat those. I don't touch them, with a 10-foot pole. I don't even consider it.
Mhm.
Because I know how it'll end up. I see people online on Instagram, particularly people like doing blood sugar tests with all
Mhm.
these like different like processed foods. And so, at this point at where I'm at, I can look at that and I can be like, I think we all know where this is going. This is an experiment that doesn't need to be done. But there are
Right.
people out there doing them. And, part of it is like they're giving into their addiction. Like they want a reason to eat this thing. Oh, I'm going to test my blood sugar with this for the
Mhm.
good of the community or whatever, when really it's just a reason to eat something that you probably shouldn't be eating. And we know like there's certain things we don't need to test. We know how it's going to work out if you eat a Pop Tart, or let me say like animal cracker, whatever it is that you're experimenting with, we know how it's going to turn out. So we have all got to identify though like what foods are a problem. There are definitely real whole foods that there's nothing inherently bad about them. I know but there are people I know who argue that like all plants are bad and all plants want
Yeah.
to kill you, and I don't know enough of the science to like say that one way or another. I know I feel better with fewer plants, but yeah, like we've got to figure out what works, what's gonna work for us, what's gonna keep us satisfied, not craving. And
Mhm.
so we have to identify those things.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to know yourself and know what your limits are and know if
Yes.
you're an abstainer or a moderator. So we've talked about moderation a little bit. You want to talk about the difference between an abstainer and a moderator?
Yeah, so moderators don't have any emotional attachments to food. They don't care. If there was an announcement today that tomorrow, that today is the last day that anybody on earth will have access to bread, moderators would be like, "Ah, man, that's kind of a bummer." And they would move on with their life. People who should abstain will lose their mind.
Yeah.
They will be upset, because people that need to abstain are emotionally attached to food. They
Mhm.
use food inappropriately. They're, like you said, they've never had just one Oreo. They don't know what it's like to leave food on a plate. So that's the difference. I've heard it described before that, and I completely disagree with it. Some people say that moderators know they're moderators because they get anxious if they're not allowed to eat certain things, and I completely disagree with that assessment. Moderators, again, don't have any emotional attachments to food, so they don't get anxiety about food. It's someone who should abstain that gets anxious at the thought of, well, you can't ever eat cake again. You can't ever have, fill in the blank, whatever it is. Those addicts, food addicts, people that are disordered with their food, we get anxious when we hear that. And the thought of like, I mean, you've probably I've said these things, you've probably said these things, we've heard other people say these things. Oh gosh, I could never live without bread. I can't imagine not ever like having cake again. People say things like that. And that's because they're emotional about food. So I think that's the main difference. Moderators just don't care. They eat when they're hungry. They're only interested in food when they're hungry. And people who need to abstain are like thinking about food all the time.
And if you think you don't have a problem with food, I dare you
Yeah.
to try to give up bread and sugar for 2 weeks. If you
Yeah.
don't think you have a problem, if you don't think you're addicted, I dare you to give up, let's see, bread, rice, sugar, and ultra processed food. So things that come
Yep.
out of a package. I dare
Yeah.
you to give those things up and just eat meat, vegetables, and a little bit of fruit, like low sugar fruit, like berries.
Yeah.
I dare you to do that for 2 weeks and see how you feel, right? Like if you don't think you're addicted, try to go without it.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great, experiment to try. Because I think a lot of people, just as society as a whole, like there's like this scale of disorder. There's mild, moderate, severe, right?
Mhm.
And society as a whole, I think the majority of us are at the very least mildly disordered. Like we make decisions about food that, isn't the way like it's intended to be with food. I
Mhm.
always like to use the example of, when you go on a flight and they start passing out the snacks. If you look around, it probably at least 98% of the people on that flight take the snacks and eat them. You see very few people reject the snacks. So when they take the snack and they eat them, all these 150 something people on the plane, are they all hungry in that exact moment for that exact food? Or are they taking it because it is available, because everybody else is doing it, because it's time, it's snack time, right? Like, so that's an example of being mildly disordered. They just take food. Or look at like restaurants. Like if you go to a restaurant at noon or 5 p.m., you're going to wait because everybody's there at the same time. We've been conditioned by society to eat by a clock instead of following our natural hunger signal. But if you go at 2 or 8 p.m., it's probably you're not going to wait as long, right? Because that's not the normal eating time.
Yeah, that's right. So, as somebody who eats a ketogenic, a low carb, clean diet, let's tell everybody what a typical day of eating looks like for you. Most people are going to think you're suffering through this diet that you're doing all the time. So let's talk about what a typical day of food of eating looks like for you.
I mean, it's mostly protein. I go through phases. Like some weeks I'll have a taco bowl 3 or 4 days in a row. Some weeks I have a ribeye, every day for several days. But it's mostly protein, and then the vegetables that I do like. I like cauliflower, but I mash it up and put butter and salt.
Mhm.
Why? Because that's like more palatable than just like a
Yeah.
flower of cauliflower, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I eat butternut squash, but mostly ground beef. I like chicken breast with the skin. I like to have like salted up, so it's salty, crispy
Mhm.
skin. I mean, it's pretty boring. That's pretty much it. Ground beef, chicken, salmon, and then occasionally I'll make like egg salad or tuna salad. I occasionally have like a keto bagel that I buy from someone because I'm too lazy to make them.
Mhm.
Um, very simple and basic.
Yeah, and I think
Boring.
it yeah, but boring and nutritious is different than, like, just boring. Because there are some people who
Yes.
eat boring diets that are just, like, they eat rice cakes because they're watching
Oh,
my
yeah.
they wanna lose weight, and then they have, rice with their grilled fat-free chicken breast for dinner. Like, to me, that sounds boring. The things that
Right.
you're eating are so nutritious. So you might eat the same things
Right.
over and over again, but they're nutritious and they're
Yes, they're
flavorful and they're
nutrient dense and
rich. Yeah.
satiating. There's no suffering going on. Yeah, I can remember, I mean, I would eat like a 10 pack of rice cakes because they were only
Yeah.
30 calories each. There was no fat, right? And I could eat 10 rice cakes, which is not normal. It's not
Mm-mm.
normal to eat 10 rice cakes, you know, but it was purely because okay, it's fat free, and it's low calorie. So yeah, it's definitely so my version of boring, it's boring in the sense that like I just eat a lot of the same stuff. It's
Mhm.
nutrient dense, it satiates me. I'm not always like searching for some new thing. I think that uh variety can be
Mhm.
a problem for people. Like if we're constantly searching for variety or we
Mhm.
feel bored with our food to the point where we don't want to keep eating it, we are not using food for the right reasons. Like food should be to nourish us so that we have the energy to do all the things in life like that we're meant to do. But when we are constantly looking for variety, we're looking for entertainment from our food. And I think that's a red flag that we're somewhat disordered.
Absolutely, and that is most people, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, all of our life, everything we do, every day, everywhere we go, every party we go to, every gathering, everything revolves around food.
Yeah.
I believe that, and I have been around drugs and alcohol my whole life. My parents were alcoholics and drug addicts, and I
Mhm.
can honestly say that it seems to me like being a food or a carb or a sugar addict and having to abstain from that would be harder than somebody who has to give up drugs or alcohol, because you can just quit hanging out with those friends, you can quit going to those parties, but if you have a food problem, you can't quit going places or you'll have nowhere to go.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely harder in the sense that, people say, "Oh yeah, it's easier to quit drugs and alcohol because, you don't have to have those to live." And that's very true. But most of us that are disordered with food or food addicts, we take things to extremes, right? So when we say, "Oh, we can't just quit eating," you're right. We can't just quit eating, but we can just quit eating Oreos. We
That's right.
can just quit eating pasta. We can't, you know what I'm saying? Like
Mhm.
we don't have to have everything on the menu. So, when we're in recovery and we have the right tools and strategies and mindset, then we can navigate those things and we know what our boundaries are and what we can and can't have. We're choosing, like my food sobriety is I choose to eat foods that nourish me. I don't eat
Mhm.
foods that harm me. So, that makes it a lot easier to know what to eat when you have parameters in place.
Yeah, absolutely. Mary, this has been really great. You are such a great coach and so great at helping people. Tell everybody where they can find you.
They can find my website at foodfreedomwithmary.com and on Instagram and Facebook, I'm Keto Mary 71.
And if you had one piece of advice for people, what would it be?
Oh gosh, if you have struggled with, your weight and food and dieting, like you're a chronic dieter up and down, your problem isn't that you need to find the right macro, combination. You don't need, diet information. You need to fix the relationship with food. So I would say seek out, repairing that relationship than seeking out diet activities.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mary. We'll have to do this again.
Thank you so much.
And we'll see you next time here on the Carnivore Revolution.